Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed.
A potentially massive wrench has just been thrown into Israeli-Russian relations in an incident that took place over Syrian airspace. Shortly before the Yom Kippur holiday, Israeli jets apparently launched an airstrike on a Syrian military target in the country. Syrian defense missiles fired back, attempting to block the volley, but struck a Russian plane in the crossfire instead. All 15 passengers aboard that plane were killed in the incident. This has put Israeli-Russian relations to the test unlike no other event in recent memory. In a rare move, the Israeli Air Force admitted that they had indeed conducted an operation in Syrian airspace. Syria immediately accused Israel of intentionally using the Russian plane as a cover to avoid retaliation, and even in Moscow, Russia's immediate reaction was one of skepticism that Israel had acted properly. Russia is, of course, an essential linchpin for Israeli interests in Syria, which mostly revolve around the removal of Iranian proxy armies from the northern border. Needless to say, this incident posed quite a dilemma for Israeli leaders then. In the hours before Yom Kippur, Prime Minister Netanyahu was on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin, conveying his sorrow for the deaths of 15 Russian nationals. Shortly thereafter, Putin issued a formal statement to the media, mostly absolving Israel of responsibility for the incident. Contrary to Putin's words on Monday, however, Moscow has apparently just pulled a complete 180. Earlier today, Russia's Tel Aviv embassy posted the following on Twitter, accusing Israel's Air Force of, quote, irresponsible and unfriendly actions that led to the downing of their plane and these 15 deaths. For now, it remains unclear where Israeli-Russian relations truly stand, or whether or not this incident can be sorted out without straining tensions any further. All right, in other news, the Chabad Synagogue of Charlotte, North Carolina arranged for pre-Yom Kippur kosher meals to be delivered to Jewish families that had been hit by Hurricane Florence in Wilmington, North Carolina. Rabbi Yossi Groner from Charlotte's Chabad House spoke on the phone to Rabbi Moshe Lieblich of Wilmington on Monday to discuss sending the food to Jewish families in the city. Groner's son, whose friend is a helicopter mechanic, was then able to arrange for a helicopter to arrive at Wilmington on Tuesday, just a few hours before the start of the Yom Kippur fast. The helicopter carried 150 pounds worth of kosher meals for the roughly 1,000 Jewish Wilmington families, but due to the hurricane, the Chabad in Wilmington was the only synagogue in the city that held Yom Kippur services. A few days earlier, a truck full of kosher food had been sent from Raleigh, North Carolina, when the hurricane first touched down, but it was rejected by local authorities due to the dangerous road conditions. Hurricane Florence has had record high levels of rainfall, which have poured up to 10 trillion gallons of water into North Carolina. The damage may continue to get worse over the next few days, too, as there's been devastating amounts of flooding caused by overflowing rivers, as well as damaging winds. Vast amounts of land have been left uninhabitable. 21 flood gauges showed major or moderate flooding in southeast North Carolina and northeast South Carolina, and major waterways are expected to continue to rise throughout the weekend. Over 10,000 people have remained in shelters, and 160,000 people have been left without power in North Carolina. There have been 2,600 people that have been rescued by boats or helicopters in North Carolina since the storm hit, and many residents have been warned not to return home until the water levels subside. The death toll has climbed to at least 37 as of today, and the latest drowning victims include 2 women in South Carolina who were rescued by a sheriff's van, which was then swept away by the flooding. Meanwhile, unfortunately, some experts believe that much of the devastation from the storm could have been prevented. 6 years ago, North Carolina legislators passed a bill that prevented lawmakers and developers from using up-to-date climate devices to prepare for the rising sea levels, despite a panel of scientists on the Coastal Resources Commission issuing a warning in 2010. Now, many are regretting their decision not to take preventative measures, as the storm has taken several dozen lives, put thousands more lives in danger, and will cost billions of dollars in repairs. It's with a heavy heart that we say one final goodbye to pro-Israel activist and longtime ILTV contributor Aris Folds. Folds was the victim of yesterday's terror attack outside a shopping mall in the West Bank, where he was fatally stabbed by a 17-year-old Palestinian terrorist. Late last night, hundreds, if not thousands, gathered to mourn Folds at his funeral, which was held at the Gush Etzion cemetery. News of Ari's death has gathered mourners near and far. Top European, American, Israeli, and UN leaders have all passed along their condolences to Ari's family. Ari was a father of 4 who served in the IDF before coming to be known as a fierce pro-Israel activist, with the NGO Standing Together. As many of you know, he was also a well-known media figure and frequently contributed to ILTV for many years as a correspondent in the field, an expert guest, and as the co-host of our Frenemies show. That's his professional life, but as a testament to his personal life and conviction, even his final act before death summed up the kind of man that he was. After being fatally stabbed in the upper body by his attacker, Fold managed to pull out his handgun and shoot the fleeing terrorist before collapsing to the ground himself to prevent a similar fate from befalling anyone else.
One word that would typify him, it would be that word of Gibor. He was a hero to all. He took such pride in you children. The jewels of his life.
United States Ambassador to Israel David Friedman praised this final act, calling Fold an American patriot. Similar statements were issued by Israel's French and EU ambassadors, along with echoes from Israeli President Reuven Rivlin and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who paid a personal visit to Fold's family shortly before his funeral late last night. This is a truly difficult goodbye to a cherished friend. All right, 17-year-old Khalil Youssef Ali Jabarin has been identified as the terrorist who fatally stabbed Aris Folds, and just hours after mourners gathered to grieve the loss of Aris Folds at his funeral in Gush Etzion, IDF forces raided the Palestinian village where his killer, Jabarin, lived. What's worse, though, is that troubling reports have also now surfaced suggesting that the killer's parents actually warned IDF and Palestinian police forces ahead of time that their son was intending to carry out a terror attack. The IDF has confirmed that Jabarin's mother did, in fact, report to soldiers at the Meitar military checkpoint near their home, telling soldiers that their son had disappeared and intended to commit a terror attack. At the same time, Jabarin's father, who had had an argument with his son mere hours earlier, told Palestinian police that his son had disappeared and may be a risk. Both sides apparently mobilized to question other relatives, but as we know, those plans ultimately came far too late. Jabarin committed his terror attack around noon yesterday, stabbing Fold in the back before being shot by Fold and other armed civilians shortly thereafter. IDF security teams raided the village of Yatta late last night, searching the home of Jabarin and measuring it for a planned demolition in the wake of the attack. The Palestinian mayor of Yatta issued a statement condemning his resident for committing an act of terror, but with many across the world mourning Fold's death, clearly this is a pain that won't be diminished by mere words alone.
Well, explosions rocked the Damascus airport in Syria late last night. Pro-regime sources say that Syrian air defense batteries shot down a large flurry of attempted airstrikes, which most accuse Israel of leading this affront. And this alleged attack is said to have targeted an Iranian shipment of weapons and storage facilities. If true, this indeed would be a prime target for Israeli forces.
At this time, it remains unclear just how much damage was done in the attack. As per military policy, the IDF has neither confirmed nor denied any involvement here. Now, having said that, military spokesman only weeks ago confirmed that Israel had conducted some 200 airstrikes throughout Syria in recent years. And this latest incident would certainly follow similar strategies allegedly used by the Israeli Air Force in the past. Reports suggest that this round of attacks focused primarily on two targets: an Iranian plane carrying weapons that had just landed in Damascus from Tehran, and a series of storage rooms at Damascus airport believed to be storing weapons. But most troubling of all is one report that suggests that these rooms were labeled with United Nations or DHL mail service logos. If correct, this would suggest a clear and concerted effort to thwart Israeli efforts and sneak under the radar. With the Syrian civil war largely coming to a close following 7 bloody years, Israeli leaders have promised to do everything in their power to keep Iran from claiming a foothold in the destabilized region. Presuming this latest airstrike was indeed the work of the Israeli military, it would demonstrate the army's willingness to make good on that threat.
The Trump administration has just cut the last of its financial aid to the Palestinian civilians. This final $10 million aid package formally funded joint Israeli-Palestinian peace programs for coexistence, programs that included soccer games, mutual farming, and other such cooperatives.
White House officials say that while the decision is regrettable, these programs themselves are useless if current Palestinian leaders fail to engage with the U.S. on Trump's still unseen peace plan. Jared Kushner especially has defended the administration's cuts to the Palestinians, saying that these punitive measures are the only way to make the Palestinians listen. For others, however, this sudden and abrupt end to U.S. funding of programs that mostly benefits Palestinian and Israeli children is a sign that the White House may have reached the end of its diplomatic abilities. Indeed, U.S. aid, which receives foreign aid funds from the government but is able to act independently of it, says that they will continue funding such joint operative programs themselves. For them, these programs represent the best hope of instilling instilling the seeds of peace at a young age, seeds which could impact future leadership. Israeli leaders have largely hailed these latest U.S. budget cuts to the Palestinians, especially its defunding of UNRWA, the UN's chief refugee agency for the Palestinians. At the same time, however, many of those supporters do worry that if cornered under pressure, Palestinians may succumb to desperate or even violent measures.
Clashes along the Gaza border turned violent over the weekend. The IDF reported tens of thousands of Palestinians attempted to infiltrate the border, as well as throwing deadly firebombs and stones. Israeli forces have responded with force to these threats, and at this time, 3 Palestinians, including a 12-year-old boy, have been killed in these latest clashes.
This is, of course, only the latest flash of violence along the Gaza border. These gatherings officially began as the Hamas-sponsored March of Return protests, which rallied earlier this year leading up to the opening of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Months later, however, Palestinians have continued to gather and picket along the border in what is becoming a weekly flashpoint of violence between Gazans and IDF troops attempting to contain them. At this time, nearly 177 Palestinians, including several children, medical workers, and journalists, have all been killed in these clashes. At the same time, however, Hamas has acknowledged that the vast majority of those slain have all been members of their own ranks. Israeli leaders have defended Israel's right to defend itself, even with lethal means, in the face of such obvious violence. But the death toll has sparked international condemnation and calls for investigations into IDF conduct. This weekend's death of a 12-year-old Palestinian child amidst these clashes sums up the paradox well, with conflicting reports that suggest no clear end in sight. Hamas officials, for example, and witnesses say that the boy died when an Israeli tear gas canister struck his head, but IDF forces say that their video evidence proves the child was struck by a Palestinian stone from their side of the fence, and health ministry reports from Gaza only specify that the child died due to an unspecified head wound, with no other clarification offered. Rumors of an attempted Israeli-Hamas ceasefire have all but run out of steam at this point. The only sure thing now is that these clashes will continue to erupt as they have so far for months on end.
In a shocking turn of events, United States President Donald Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has officially entered into a plea agreement as guilty with the FBI on conspiracy charges. As part of this deal, he has agreed to provide special counsel Robert Mueller with information on his former boss, President Trump, as it relates to the ongoing investigation into Trump's alleged collusion with Russia to win the 2016 election. But according to prosecutors' indictment papers, Manafort has already named a, quote, senior Israeli official from the government as one of his co-conspirators in illicit work he did for a former leader of Ukraine.
A tough day for Mr. Manafort, but he's accepted responsibility, and he wanted to make sure that his family was able to remain safe and live a good life. He's accepted responsibility, and this is for conduct that dates back many years, and everybody should remember that. So thank you, everyone.
The indictment was filed with the courts shortly before the weekend, at which time the details first became public. It accuses Manafort of working with an anonymous Israeli official at the top tier of the government in a conspiracy to benefit the then president of Ukraine's pro-Russia party, Viktor Yanukovych. He was registered as a client of Paul Manafort at the time, and this conspiracy is said to include spreading false allegations that a political opponent was anti-Semitic. The conspiracy also included false stories of anti-Semitism targeting then United States President Barack Obama in an effort to pressure Obama into aligning with Manafort's pro-Russia client. Now, here in Israel, accusations regarding the identity of the unnamed senior Israeli government official have already begun to fly. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has already come out denying that he was involved with the scandal at all, and Lieberman is demanding that the Justice Ministry obtain the identity from the United States government in an effort to clear his name. But officials close to Lieberman have reportedly already named other potential suspects anyway. One name that comes up is current Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, who was a Likud Knesset member at the time of these charges and spoke on the record to Ukraine's ambassador about anti-Semitic allegations. But at this point, this is purely speculative. More and more Knesset members are also demanding that Netanyahu obtain the true identity of Manafort's collaborator. Manafort has pled guilty to conspiracy against the United States, as well as a slew of money laundering and obstruction of justice charges, after being found guilty of 8 other fraud charges last month. President Trump has said that Manafort is a good man despite his criminal convictions, and that the charges are unrelated to the Russia investigation. But given that Manafort will now provide the FBI with intel on the lead-up to Trump's election, this may all be a matter for the courts to decide soon. Now, shortly before the Yom Kippur holiday, Prime Minister Netanyahu delivered some good news that thousands had been waiting to hear. Netanyahu has officially greenlit plans to bring 1,000 relatives of Ethiopian Israeli Jews here to Israel For many, this is a long time coming. For some, a very promising step in the right direction, and for others, still a long way from over. But ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the full story.
Hi, thanks, Aaron. So yeah, this is really exciting news for a lot of Ethiopian Israeli families here. As you imagine, right now there are close to like 130,000 Ethiopian Jews living in Israel. And most of them originally airlifted into the country in two major waves. So that first one was in 1984 with Operation Moses, and the second was in 91 with Operation Solomon. But those operations were quite possibly some of the, the biggest covert airlifts ever done in Israeli history, as you probably know. Since then, this community has really flourished here in Israel, where they serve in the army, they do social service, and of course they have, Israeli citizenship like everyone else here. But as successful as those initial operations in the 80s and 90s were, a lot of Ethiopians still have direct relatives. We're talking sisters, brothers, parents, what have you, stuck in Ethiopia still. And I think right now the number is close to something like 8,000 confirmed relatives by the last survey. Yeah. So the Israeli government has long promised to bring that entire community of 8,000 to Israel once and for all. But so far, this is as close as they've gotten, and that's why for some, news of this first 1,000 Ethiopian family members is certainly worth celebrating, no doubt. But for others, it comes with a kind of, let's say, a bittersweetness, since there's still so many more still trapped in Ethiopia.
Sure, and we've spoken with members of Israel's Ethiopian community who do have family members still in Ethiopia, and for them, waiting years or even decades just to see their brothers or sisters is just agony.
Right.
But having said that, the logistics of this kind of operation can't be easy either. We're talking money, organization, and of course immigration for thousands of people.
Yeah, no doubt. that initial pledge, right, from Prime Minister Netanyahu to bring every last Ethiopian Jew to Israel, that was made, almost 3 years ago now in 2015. So obviously, it takes time. But like with everything, it's also a question of, let's say, urgency and priority, of course. And that's really where the debate kind of comes in here. So the newly appointed chairman of the Jewish Agency, Isaac Herzog, says that this first step of 1,000, that's a step in the right direction, a great step, actually. But the real test is going to be how quickly that entire remaining group of 7,000 get immigration status here like that first group. But for that, we'll obviously just have to wait and see.
All right, we'll wait, we shall. In the meantime, I'm sure thousands of families are very eager to finally see their loved ones in person for the first time.
Sure.
And that'll be such an incredible day, when it finally comes. Brett, thanks for the report.
Of course.
Professors should encourage students to explore educational opportunities without the influence of personal politics. But for University of Michigan Associate Professor John Cheney-Lippold, that is not the case. Cheney-Lippold, a professor from the American Culture Department at U of M, refused to recommend student Abigail Ingber for a study program in Israel.
He wrote her an email stating that, quote, many university departments have pledged academic boycotts against Israel in support of Palestinians living in Palestine. This boycott includes letters of recommendation for students planning to study there, end quote. He ended the email saying he would be happy to write her other letters, however, provided they are to anywhere else. It is important to note, though, that the University of Michigan does not align with Cheney-Lippold's stance, and Kim Brookhind, the spokeswoman for the university, responded saying, quote, the academic goals of our students are of paramount importance. It's the university's position to take all steps necessary to make sure our students are supported. And while members of the University of Michigan community have a wide range of individual opinions on this and many other topics, the university has consistently opposed any boycott of Israeli institutions of higher education, end quote. Ingber told the Michigan Daily she is currently unable to comment on the incident as she's waiting to discuss it with university officials.
It's a Yom Kippur miracle. Israel's Ramat Gan Zoological Center has just announced that one of its nearly extinct white rhinoceroses gave birth to a healthy 110-pound female baby rhino. And this was the 5th rhino born to the zoo's 25-year-old white rhino named Tanda. A year and a half ago, safari workers saw a male rhino mating with Tanda and soon discovered that she was pregnant. White rhinoceros pregnancies typically last 16 to 18 months, so they planned the birth around this time. Then, just prior to the birth, Tanda and her 4 other children were taken into a fenced-off area of the safari known as the maternity ward, where the newborn rhino would eventually meet her siblings. The baby rhino has not yet been named, though, as the safari suggests a list of potential names for the public to choose. And now, most important of all, though, this birth is part of an ongoing effort throughout the world to save the white rhinos, which are on the verge of extinction. White rhinos are a sought-after breed for hunters, as their horns are worth more than gold on the black market. And this year, over 1,000 of these rhinos have been hunted in South Africa alone. The Ramat Gan Safari works with a European breeding program that helps to conserve the nearly extinct species. And out of the 300 endangered rhinos in the world, 30 of them live in Israel, the largest number of an endangered species out of the 78 other participating zoos. All right, now, in case you haven't been keeping up, reality star Kim Kardashian has just inked a deal with our very own Bar Raffaelli for her part-owned eyewear brand Karolina Lemke. And that is as they try to make their mark in the United States. ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh has a scoop.
Yes, Aaron, that's right. Kim Kardashian has signed on to be an active partner in the Karolina Lemke eyewear brand, which our very own, like you said, Israeli model Bar Raffaelli is part owner of. Kim will supposedly hold 10% of the company's U.S. holdings, as well as also reportedly receiving 5% of the proceeds from her upcoming collection. And on top of all that, she will star in future campaigns alongside her friend and now business partner Bar Raffaelli.
All right, well, this is pretty big news for the brand. They definitely chose one of the more influential people to partner up with in the United States if they wanted to make a true impact. So how did this all go down?
Right. Well, first off, I was shocked with the news when we saw Bar Raffaelli's Instagram post on Wednesday, where she wrote, quote, "Friends and now partners. Kim Kardashian joined my Karolina Lemke Berlin family. Welcome, my love." So that was pretty clear-cut and exciting, and reportedly worth a casual $30 million deal. And now reports are also saying that along with that, the megastar will be visiting Israel this upcoming March as part of the collaboration, and will also be designing her own sunglass line as part of the limited edition series.
Sounds totally casual.
So casual, 30 million, you know.
But okay, but besides that, you know, this isn't the first time that Kim's been to Israel, and
right.
And not only that, it's not her first time that you know, Kim has worked with Israeli models.
Right, that's actually so exciting. You really are keeping up with the Kardashians, Aaron. You know everything.
You know it.
Kim actually hired the teenage Israeli model Yael Shelbia to be the face of her new makeup line, KKW Beauty, this past summer. And not just that, Kardashian also partnered up with the Israeli-American fashion app Screen Shop, which I actually interviewed. So it isn't the first and hopefully not the last time Kim's going to be collaborating with some of, you know, Israel's best. And I can't wait to see the new Karolina Lemke Kardashian designs.
All right, well, hopefully I'll be able to find something in the new line that fits me too, you know, something in my size and my style. Until the release date, though, I'll expect you to keep me updated.
Of course.
Thanks for the report, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.